Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world, and a very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Soola Georgiou and I will be delivering, I'm very proud to be delivering this webinar on keeping children safe in education and the changes that came into place at the beginning of this term. And I'm really pleased to be able to be delivering this webinar. As I said, I'm very proud to be representing Veema Education. My name, as I said, is Soola, and my background is I've got a legal background, but I'm also an experienced child protection trainer, safeguarding and child protection. I've been doing child protection training and continuing professional development for the past 20 years, just over 20 years now. So without further ado, I would like to start this webinar. You will be able to ask questions if you'd like to email us. And if you do have a pen or a paper and a pen or pencil and a piece of paper handy, do have them ready, because I have got a couple of small exercises for you during the course of the webinar. So, keeping children safe in education, and to evidence best practice, overseas schools should consider keeping children safe in education 2018 as the benchmark for good practice. Some of the key themes in the updates and changes are expected to be seen by Ofsted inspectors in the UK. So it's really recommended that international schools and British schools overseas adapt their own policies in line with the changes to the UK guidance to satisfy inspection or accreditation bodies. So this webinar is really a general overview of the changes to some areas may not apply to your school context. They were introduced by Keeping Children Safe in Education and Working Together to Safeguard Children this year. It is UK statutory guidance, and international schools should do their best to follow where possible as a benchmark of best practice. The new Part 5 guidance provides guidance to schools on how they should respond to reports of child-on-child sexual violence and sexual harassment. And there is an emphasis on the role of designated safeguarding leads and the management of safeguarding. There's clarity on information sharing and how it's crucial in keeping children safe in education. There's guidance on reasonable force and the importance of planning where it may need to be used. And the new addition of contextual safeguarding and county lines where gangs target vulnerable children to groom them as drug dealers. There's clarity on safer recruitment training, and it's the first point at which schools can prevent abuse. And online safety is emphasised as a crucial component of safeguarding. We're going to focus on the challenges facing our international school communities and our British schools overseas in striving to understand various cultural attitudes, laws and actions in addressing forms of abuse, and particularly in the areas outlined in this slide. Some of the main challenges are around multi-agency support too. How can we develop capacity? How can we educate our communities? So if you have a pen and paper, can I ask you to spend a few moments thinking about your particular communities and settings? What do you consider to be your key difficulties and obstacles, so that we can start thinking about how we can begin to address them? So I'll just give you a couple of moments just to think about those things that might be presenting obstacles for you. So for example, you may have written down something like, what can you do in order to work through those difficulties in terms of multi-agency working and not being able sometimes to make those referrals if you are in a British school overseas or in an international school. Some of the examples that I can give you are working with parents and pupils alike, for example, through educational workshops, meetings to improve communication and helping them understand what the school's safeguarding duty is about, to listen to their questions and talk about any fears and to strive for a mutual understanding and making plans on how to move forward together. So developing positive partnerships with your parents, working together and sharing knowledge. All these different aspects will help you to develop capacity by working together to prevent all forms of abuse. And if by the end of the webinar your questions have still not been answered, then please do email us and we will get back to you. All staff should be aware that safeguarding issues can manifest themselves via peer-on-peer abuse. This is now a specific safeguarding issue, and you'll find information about peer-on-peer abuse in paragraphs 94 to 95 of Keeping Children Safe in Education. It's most likely to include, but may not be limited to, bullying. It can include physical abuse, such as hitting, kicking, shaking, biting, hair pulling, or otherwise causing physical harm. It can include sexual violence and sexual harassment. Sexual violence can be rape, it can be sexual assault, it can be intentionally touching another person in a way that it's sexual, or creating a hostile or offensive or sexualized environment that would violate a child's dignity. It can be intimidating and it can be degrading. Cyberbullying is a form of bullying using electronic means, and that can include things like threats and intimidation, harassment and stalking, defamation, rejection and isolation and exclusion. It can include identity theft, hacking into social media accounts and impersonation. It can include things like publicly posting or sending on personal information about another person. Sexting or youth-produced sexual imagery is around sending, receiving or forwarding sexually explicit messages, photographs or images. It can be anonymous. Even those children who have never bullied or never been involved as a bully in the past can post or share something without thinking, and sometimes it can have criminal repercussions. The internet never sleeps, it's growing. So we have 14 to 5-year-olds who are the peak years where cyberbullying tends to peak. The guidance advises that there should be a case-by-case response, supported where possible by children's social care and the police, and all victims must be taken seriously, supported and kept safe. Staff should be trained to manage a disclosure and be clear on the school policy on peer-on-peer abuse. It's important also to remember that children who might be displaying harmful sexual behaviours have often experienced their own abuse and their own trauma. Bullying, physical abuse, sexual violence and harassment and cyberbullying are serious forms of aggression. They're unacceptable and they must be taken seriously. So there should be clear processes as to how victims, perpetrators and any other child affected by peer-on-peer abuse will be supported. In your school policy, there should be a clear statement that abuse is abuse and should never be tolerated or passed off as banter, just having a laugh or part of growing up. The head teacher, Matthew Burton, advocates on parents and schools to work together. And I really wanted to show you a short film where he talks about this type of thing and talks about how in his school he has managed to keep his children safe from in terms of online safety. So what I've done is I've given you the link to this short film, so please do try and have a look at it if you can. But what I will do is I will talk about the main points that he talks about and some advice that you might like to give to your parents. So in this short film, he shares his experiences of supporting teenagers online as they progress through secondary school and gives 3 top tips for parents, including the importance of parents working with schools. To take proactive action really to protect children from risks such as sexting, cyberbullying or taking part in harmful games online. He talks about opportunities within the classroom to improve teaching and learning. and to deepen students' understanding of concept and bring something extra to the classroom, something that they wouldn't not necessarily in the past have been able to do. He also reminds us that while the internet brings fantastic opportunities for everyone, it does need to be treated very carefully and ensure that children know how to use it effectively. Both schools and parents are clearly concerned about the amount of phone usage and how phones and the internet does monopolise the time of our children and young people. Consequently, there are times where children are actually one step ahead of the game, and they are, after all, the generation who are growing up with the internet, and it's never not been a thing for them. So they are one step ahead of the game in terms of being in front of their teachers or parents and adults in many cases. Parents are concerned that children don't necessarily get the opportunity to have that traditional family time, to having conversations, to having eye contact, and the sort of soft skills that perhaps are like interview skills in a way, because a lot of the time they're spending their time staring at an app or staring at their mobile phone. Other concerns that parents do report are around online bullying and how easy that is to do. Where parents have concerns, they need to make sure they tell the school. He talks about triangulating a response between parents and home. The school policy about keeping children safe online shouldn't just be a piece of paper that exists on the website, or that it's there because it has to be there. It should be something that actually lives and breathes through the values of the school. So it's about creating opportunities for open, positive, constructive debate and conversation, and actually talking about those positive messages and positive values of how the internet can be used. But similarly, the risks that are inherent within within that, and what's your school policy around making it clear what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what will be followed through. His mantra is that everything that goes wrong is an opportunity to do something right. And I like that. So create opportunities within assemblies to get these positive messages across, and sometimes use some social stories to get that message across. That's really important. It's easy to say that it won't happen to me, but actually other people have said that and it happened to them. And it does happen to real people. These terrible things unfortunately do happen. So Matthew Burton's top 3 tips to parents to help them play an active role in their child's digital life are: firstly, having access to their child's platform and using that positively, not to snoop, but to check and safeguard, and to ensure that their child is absolutely safe going forward. Secondly, it's really important that parents speak to their children about it and try not to overreact. Speak to the school about whether their child may be the perpetrator, or the person who's being unpleasant or unkind online, or whether their child is the victim. It's about reporting it through the right channels and going through the channels within that particular platform. Finally, it's about working with the school. Whatever your school policy on online safety and the use of mobile phones, it's really important that schools and parents work together. Everybody wants to safeguard children. Everybody wants to keep them safe online. So it is about working together, and it's only by working together to keep children safe online that it will be possible. Child-on-child sexual violence and harassment. So part 5 of Keeping Children Safe in Education is new, and it provides guidance on how you should respond to cases of child-on-child sexual violence and harassment. There's a 13-page section there which explains what schools should do immediately after such a report is made. So your school must decide whether to refer to an outside agency or to manage the case internally. For international schools, it's likely to be, how do you manage the case internally? First and foremost, ensure you take account of the child's wishes and feelings, taking into account the child's ages, whether they're disabled, what their developmental stage is there a perceived power imbalance? Is the alleged perpetrator exerting power over the victim? Seek early help wherever possible and with a multi-agency approach if possible. And I know that the lack of external support available to some of our overseas schools can be quite limited. So what can you do to ensure you're supporting your children. It's even more important without that multi-agency support to ensure our schools are safe places where our pupils feel safe, where they have the confidence to talk to you if they've got a worry, where they know how to keep themselves safe, how to keep their peers safe. And throughout the curriculum, we can introduce safeguarding to ensure our pupils know what it means. So it's about teaching children how to be safe, how to be happy. It's about encouraging the understanding that any problem or worry they may have, however big or however small, at school, at home, or in the outside world, that they should share these worries with a trusted adult. And that person could be a school counsellor, a learning mentor, a pastoral lead, a teaching assistant, above all, somebody who can be available for children to talk to and who has had the appropriate training. So again, develop positive relationships with your parents by working together, by sharing knowledge, asking them how safe do they think their children are, getting their viewpoint on what they feel might work better. Keeping children safe in education reinforces the importance of the role of the designated safeguarding lead, who should be from the senior leadership team, and states that wherever possible, they should have a complete safeguarding picture. Those are the words used. So the designated safeguarding lead is positioned as the person who can give you the most information and help clarify what's happening in a child's life. All international schools should make it clear who their designated safeguarding lead or equivalent is, and ensure that job descriptions are extended to reflect the update in keeping children safe in education. This shows a really high standard and helps to helps the setting demonstrate the importance they place on safeguarding. All staff should be aware of the process of making referrals and be aware of their role in any assessments, particularly for children who may benefit from early help, with an emphasis of those who have got special educational needs and disabilities, young carers, children who may be missing or frequently go missing, or those who may be misusing drugs or alcohol, or perhaps the family is misusing drugs or alcohol, or they may be living with domestic violence, or there may be mental health issues. There's also an emphasis in the guidance on staff always speaking to the designated safeguarding lead without delay. And there's a flow chart on page 13 that sets out the process where there may be concerns. If your designated safeguarding lead or deputies are not available, this should not delay appropriate action being taken. And regarding early help, there is an emphasis on supporting other agencies in the early help assessment, and a referral to children's social care should be made. And if there's no progress, then a referral should be made to the appropriate agencies. The designated safeguarding lead is expected to take the lead generally and to make the referral. Above all, there shouldn't be a delay in sharing information with the designated safeguarding lead. Schools should, where possible, also have more than one emergency contact for parents or carers. So this is an example of the first three possible steps that describe actions to be taken where there are concerns about a child. There is an emphasis that concerns about a child's welfare should be acted on immediately. And early help means providing support as soon as a problem emerges at any point in a child's life, and where a child would benefit from coordinated early help, and early help interagency assessment should be arranged. Where that multi-agency support isn't available, potentially this is true of settings who are in an international context, a robust pastoral care system, which includes counselling, mentoring, working well with parents and children, is strongly advised, with a rigorous monitoring and review system to ensure children are progressing and that they are kept safe. So the flow chart doesn't actually look like this, but these are the first three steps that I wanted to go through with you. But please do have a look at the flow chart. So looking at systems to support safeguarding, all staff should be aware of systems within their school that support safeguarding and child protection, and these should be explained to them as part of the staff induction. Staff induction should include the child protection policy, the staff behaviour policy, which is sometimes called a code of conduct, the role of the designated safeguarding lead, including the identity of the designated safeguarding lead and any deputies, and copies of these policies and a copy of Part 1 of Keeping Children Safe in Education should be provided to staff at induction. For staff who work directly with children, they should also, as from this term, have received Annex A. And so that will cover all that important additional information about specific safeguarding issues. For example, there is a section on preventing radicalisation, domestic abuse, honour-based violence, and 4 additional topics in this updated version of Keeping Children Safe in Education are children in the court system, where children are appearing as witnesses, children with family members in prison, and the criminal exploitation of children through county lines, which we will have a look at in a few moments, and homelessness. The 2 areas highlighted in red on this slide, that's the behaviour policy and the school safeguarding response to children missing education, are 2 new areas that should now also be part of staff induction. So the use of technology has become a significant component of many safeguarding issues. Child sexual exploitation, radicalisation, sexual predators who use grooming in order to gain the trust of children with a view to going on to harm them. Technology often provides the platform that facilitates harm. The expectation is that governing bodies and proprietors should ensure that children are taught about safeguarding, including online safety, and schools should consider this as part of providing a broad and balanced curriculum. It's essential that schools ensure that appropriate filters and monitoring systems are in place, but they should be careful that over-blocking does not lead to unreasonable restrictions as to what children can be taught. For example, via online teaching and safeguarding. All staff should undergo safeguarding and child protection training, including online safety at induction. And the expectation is that designated safeguarding leads are able to understand the unique risks associated with online safety and be confident that they have the relevant knowledge and up-to-date capability required to keep children safe while they're online at school. The guidance emphasises that online safety training for staff should be integrated, aligned and considered as part of the overarching safeguarding approach. So Keeping Children Safe in Education explains the importance of information sharing in safeguarding children. And there are 2 new additions. You'll find these in paragraphs 74 and 75. Essentially, this means planning seamless safeguarding support for children who might be transferring schools. In addition to the child protection file, the designated safeguarding lead should also consider whether it would be appropriate to pass on information with the new school or college in advance of a child leaving. For example, information that would allow the new school or college to continue supporting victims of abuse and have that support in place for when the child arrives. So that is about planning seamless safeguarding support for children transferring schools. So information sharing, we know, is vital to good safeguarding. Don't assume that somebody else will take action. In Keeping Children Safe in Education, there is a reminder of the importance of sharing information at an early stage. Best practice places a duty on schools and staff to process personal information fairly and lawfully, and to keep the information they hold safe and secure. There's nothing that would prevent or limit the sharing of information for the purposes of keeping children safe. There's nothing new here, it's what it was before. So there is a reminder in the new guidance that Fears about sharing information must not be allowed to stand in the way of the need to promote the welfare and protect the safety of children. Previous standalone guidance around reasonable force is now integrated within Keeping Children Safe in Education, and you'll find this information in paragraphs 103 to 105. We know that schools have a power to use reasonable force when they need to, and the guidance advocates a proactive behaviour policy, and that means putting together individual behaviour plans that are agreed with parents in order to minimise the need for force, specifically for children who have got special educational needs and disabilities. It's not wise to have a no contact policy because that can leave staff unable to fulfil their responsibilities with regard to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of a child, because they're unable to fully support and protect their pupils if there is a no contact policy. So the guidance does make it clear that schools should not have a no touch or no contact policy. But the decision to use reasonable force to control or restrain a child is down to the professional judgment of the staff member concerned and should always depend on individual circumstances. So it's a case-by-case basis. Usually it's used to prevent pupils from hurting themselves or others, from damaging property or from causing disorder. Every school is required to have a behaviour policy and to make this policy known to staff, parents and pupils. And the behaviour policy should include the power to use reasonable force. Special educational needs and disabilities. So not only should there be an increased awareness and recognition of the additional risks and vulnerabilities that children with special educational needs and disabilities face online, the new guidance also highlights the importance of safeguarding and increased pastoral care, mentoring and support of these children. So does your child protection policy, for example, reflect the fact that additional barriers can exist when recognising abuse and neglect in this group of children? What kind of additional barriers am I referring to? Assumptions that indicators of possible abuse such as behaviour, mood and injury relate to the child's disability without further exploration of what it may relate to, being more prone to peer group isolation than other children, and the potential for children with special educational needs and disabilities being disproportionately impacted by behaviours such as bullying, without outwardly showing any signs. So they can actually hide it quite well. And they have the communication barriers and of course difficulties in overcoming all of these barriers. A new term of contextual safeguarding has been introduced. Contextual safeguarding involves neighbourhoods, schools and online violence and abuse, child sexual exploitation in school and other public places, gang involvement and peer-on-peer abuse, sexual harassment and abuse. This means that we need to consider the location and the culture of your school and assess the risks that young people may be exposed to, both inside and outside the school community. So within the diverse communities of international schools, contextual safeguarding can be more common. So assessments of children should consider whether wider environmental factors are present in a child's life that are a threat to their safety and or welfare. It's about significant harm, but beyond the boundaries of home. We know that children can spend increased amounts of time outside of their home and can experience violence and abuse. While schools are a protective factor to an extent, research shows that pupils have experienced sexual harassment and peer-on-peer abuse within an educational setting. It could also happen via street gangs, in parks, shopping centres, other public spaces. What can you do to work effectively in order to address contextual safeguarding? And I'll give you a few moments once again to jot down some ideas with your pen and paper before I come back to you with some ideas. So some of the things that you may have jotted down could be around reaching out to neighbourhood police teams, setting up meetings and keeping up to date with issues within the community. Student engagement is always an important one, and allowing children to express their views. Perhaps you could promote a group of students to safeguarding champions and give them a regular platform to discuss issues they may face both inside and outside of school. And it can also keep yourselves involved in terms of knowing what the current trends may be. And good quality, frequent training around issues relating to harmful sexual behaviour, which are informed by national and local evidence. It's all good practice in terms of contextual safeguarding. And please do look out for my paper on contextual safeguarding, which we are going to be putting out to schools next week on the Veema Education website. County lines or child criminal exploitation is a type of harm which is geographically widespread, and it's a typical feature of county lines criminal activity. It involves drug networks or gangs grooming and exploiting children and young people to carry drugs and money from area to area. And some of the key areas of identifying involvement are around missing episodes when the victim may have been trafficked for the purpose of carrying drugs and money. And it can affect children and young people, both male and female, both under the age of 18 years, and it can affect vulnerable adults over the age of 18 years too. It can still be exploitation even if the activity appears consensual. So the child or young person appears to want to do what they're asking them to do, but it's still exploitation. It can involve enticement-based methods of compliance, and that could be in the form of money. It could be in the form of, having new things like new mobile phones, new trainers, new items of jewellery. It is often accompanied by violence or threats of violence, and it can be perpetrated by both individuals or groups, can be males or females, young people and adults. It's usually typified by some form of power imbalance in favour of those perpetrating the exploitation. Age may be the most obvious, but the power imbalance can also be due to a range of other factors, including gender, cognitive ability, physical strength, status, and access to economic or other resources. Safeguarding starts with safer recruitment and safer recruitment training, as robust safer recruitment practice is actually the first point at which abuse can be prevented, even before candidates are interviewed. At least one of the people conducting an interview must have completed safer recruitment training. And Keeping Children Safe in Education advises schools to complete a risk assessment for each volunteer to help decide whether or not to do an enhanced DBS check or an International Child Protection Certificate check. If you decide against a check following the completion of your risk assessment, you must record that, and that means also that you'll need to arrange supervision for that member of staff. And for a person to be considered supervised, the supervision must be by a person who is already in regulated activity. So that means they're working regularly with children and they've had the appropriate checks. It has to be regular and day-to-day and reasonable in all the circumstances to ensure the protection of children. Any risk assessments you carry out must consider the nature of the work with children, what the school knows about the volunteer, including any formal or informal information offered by staff, parents, perhaps other volunteers, whether the volunteer has other employment or undertakes voluntary activities where perhaps referees can advise on their suitability. And always record whether you believe the role is eligible for an enhanced DBS check or an international child protection certificate check. You'll find guidance on supervision in Annex F of Keeping Children Safe in Education. Section 128 checks are the checks that can be made on the Teacher Services Agency website to check if staff have been prohibited from the management of a school. The guidance used to say that this applied to people in management positions, but the guidance now specifies that this means governors, trustees, head teachers, senior leadership team and department heads. And these section 128 checks, as I said, can be done on through the Teacher Services Agency. When somebody is suspended or moved out of regulated activity to another post, your school must refer to the Disclosure and Barring Service or to APRO internationally if they meet the harm criteria. And the harm criteria is if they may harm a child, if you think they may harm a child or vulnerable adult or put them at risk of harm, then they have met that criteria. Regarding references, there is a reminder in Keeping Children Safe in Education that where possible references should be obtained and scrutinised before interview, and that's because references should be checked and any concerns resolved satisfactorily before the appointment is confirmed, and that includes any internal candidate that you may be interviewing. And obtaining references before interview would allow any concerns they raise to be explored further with the referee and taken up with the candidate at interview. I think I've missed single central record, so we'll just go through just a bit of information about the single central record and what updates there are on that. It can be in paper or electronic format, so it doesn't only have to be in paper format. And Keeping Children Safe in Education, this year's version, clarifies the minimum information that must be recorded on your single central record. If you work with or around children, you have a responsibility to be aware of Working Together to Safeguard Children, which was published in July this year, and to follow, where possible, the expectations outlined in the guidance. It is multi-agency guidance and it's relevant for all agencies working with children and applies in its entirety to schools. Again, for our international community of schools who may not have the same level of multi-agency support, this can be very difficult, but it is referenced as a benchmark of good practice. What we can work on overseas is to do everything possible to make schools safe places, and that means working again on our communications with parents, because it's crucial that the relationship with parents is such that they have full confidence in how the school carries out its safeguarding duties. Some of the ways in which we can engender trust and confidence in parents is to think about these things. Are they aware of the school's duty to safeguard children? I think I mentioned that at the beginning as well. Have you asked them how they would like to work with you to ensure their child's safety and welfare? Other ways of working with parents could be through informative workshops, through involving children in drama productions for parents, for example, anti-bullying or online safety workshops. I said earlier that children and young people tend to have more knowledge around the internet and around the workings of the internet than us as adults, and so they would be prime candidates to put on an assembly or an online safety workshop for parents. And it's also a really good way of getting parents involved too in what the school is trying to do. Working Together advocates a child-centred approach as it's fundamental to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of every child. A child-centred approach means keeping the child in focus when making decisions about their lives and working in partnership with them and their families. So just a summary of your next steps, given everything that we've talked today in this webinar. Just to give you a quick summary of what we've discussed, and just some reminders about what jot down what you need to do next. So make sure you've clarified the role of your designated safeguarding lead, or the equivalent of a safeguarding lead, in their job descriptions. The role of the designated safeguarding lead is key in keeping children safe in education. I think I said earlier that they are now positioned as the person who can give you the most information and help clarify what's happening in a child's life. Any deputies, of course, should be trained to the same standard as a designated safeguarding lead, and the role should be clearly described in their job title. And their role should also be made clear in job descriptions too. Include peer-on-peer abuse in your policy updates, and ensure all staff are clear as to what the school policy and procedures say with regards to peer-on-peer abuse. Peer-on-peer abuse is prevalent in all schools, and I think we spoke earlier about the broad range of cultures within international schools. It's really crucial that staff are up to date with this specific safeguarding issue. So training and understanding of this topic is therefore thoroughly recommended. Ensure all staff understand contextual safeguarding. So it's about considering the location and the culture of your school and assessing the risks that children and young people may be exposed to, both inside and outside the school community, including online. Review and update all existing policies. The updated guidance has been available since July, that's working together, and September 2018, that's keeping children safe in education. And as such, in the UK, Ofsted will expect to see school policies referring to the updated guidance, and international schools or British schools overseas should use the guidance as a benchmark of best practice. So demonstration that overseas schools have included best practice from UK statutory guidance in their own policies is recommended. Review your continuing professional development, so ensure your training is up to date. Now is a really good time to review all your staff training. In the UK, safeguarding training has to be refreshed annually, and international schools should strive for the same frequency and should ensure that all training courses cover all that's required in keeping children safe in education 2018 and working together to safeguard children, including online safety as a significant factor of safeguarding, a significant component and not an add-on. And members of the governing body and senior leadership team should attend safe recruitment training as schools look to provide all staff with refresher training. It's also important to look at what training is being delivered and what the content of the training is. The whole school community, from caretakers to head teachers, need to be mindful about the role they may and can play within any internal monitoring, pastoral support, child protection referral or ongoing investigation. I'd like to thank you all very much for listening to this webinar. I hope you found it useful, and please don't forget to email us any questions that may have arisen and that we haven't answered during the course of this webinar. I think at this point, Costa's going to pop up and come back and speak.
I'm here. Hello.
Hello, Costa.
Hello, Soola. Thank you very much for that in very informative session. I hope our international schools have got something to take away from the last 50 minutes and things that they can discuss with colleagues, because as always, this is an opportunity to reflect on all the great work that is happening, that we know is happening around safeguarding, but just to maybe reflect on things that we can maybe need to do and maybe improve on. The webinar has been based around our program, Keeping Children Safe, and putting safeguarding at the heart of the school's agenda. And all school leaders know, we all know as educators and teachers, that the most important thing is that our children are safe, so that then we can actually give them the education that they quite rightly deserve. So whether you're interested in any further safeguarding training, whether this is a series of twilights, a 1 or 2 day course, or more of a blended program, then do contact us. if you are interested in maybe us visiting your school or even designing a bespoke webinar for you around safeguarding. The last thing I will say is that we are going to be delivering some COBIS webinars in January. Soola will be delivering a webinar on the 9th of January around the safer recruitment process. So if you go onto the COBIS website, you will be able to register for that webinar, which is on the 9th of January. And our second part will be on the 23rd of January. We'll focus on guidelines for schools on the single central register. So we will be delivering that. Again, you can register for that webinar on the COBIS website. I think that's everything from us this evening. I hope you've had a good time with us. If you are breaking up next week, then I hope you're enjoying the last few weeks of term. As I said at the beginning, look forward, because I can imagine that now is a good time for you, wanting that break that you quite rightly deserve. Have a good break, and do get in touch with us if you have any questions regarding this evening's webinar. Thank you very much, Soola, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope to hear from you soon. Good night.
Thank you.